If wildlife doesn't work for the people of that area and is of no value to them, the people will then decide, well, how can we generate benefits? So they will probably just eat the wildlife. Once they're finished with that, cut down the bush, turn it into a form of agriculture, maybe run their livestock. I think ultimately that's not a win for anyone. More and more these days we are starting to understand what is known as regenerative science, so the regenerative management of the planet. So if your management principles are not sustaining life cycles, water cycles, things like that, you're out of line. We're looking at conservation from ecological sustainability, economic sustainability, and then social sustainability. Now all three aspects of that conservation are equally as important. So sustainable principles of offtakes is very important. Are you generating the right revenue from your wildlife resource, what it's actually worth, and where's that revenue being spent? So as long as it's going back into sustaining the systems, the societies around it, and adding value, and that in essence is basically what we would call growing the wildlife economy.
Conservation has been a key objective of SA Hunters since its inception in 1949. And the association has evolved into a locally and internationally respected organization that supports an integrated and rational approach to conservation. It is recognized within the wildlife sector for its thought leadership in responsible wildlife management and the scientific community for contributing to applied research, innovation, and knowledge transfer. Acknowledging human dependency on functioning ecosystems and its role as a cornerstone for sustainable economic growth and rural development is critical. The key focus is securing wildlife habitats and associated biodiversity and promoting responsible wildlife utilization based on economic efficiency, social responsibility, and ecological sustainability principles. Wildlife as a land use must be able to compete economically with other forms of land use, or it will disappear. Hunting is an essential contributor to this and helps fund private conservation initiatives. But its future is dependent on demonstrating how it contributes to conservation, food security, human well-being, and socio-economic development.
We are one of the few, if not the only, hunting organisation that do have a permanent position and employed personnel for conservation, which I think demonstrates the commitment of the organisation towards conservation. This is not just something that is being done as an afterthought, and it's not only focused on the species that are being hunted. Conservation is an integral part of the objectives and the work of SA Hunters. We've, through the years, become part of various national and international conservation initiatives. We're a member of the IUCN, which would not have been possible if we didn't have demonstrable conservation projects. We've also been invited by many of the conservation agencies and NGOs to participate with them on international forums. My office, the Conservation Office, is represented in the National Lion Working Group. We sit on the National Vulture Task Force. We're also involved in the National Wildlife Poison Prevention Working Group and the Lead Task Team. We sit on the CICAT working group, and recently we've also been invited to participate in the development of a national response strategy for the succulents in South Africa. This is one of the areas that receives so little attention in South Africa, but out there it's a nightmare at the moment. We've got a couple of landowners in the Makwaland area, and they felt very frustrated that they have this continuous onslaught of poaching on their properties, and they don't really have a lot of support from government or anybody else. So SA Hunters decided to start this Save Our Succulents, and now we have landowners in that area that all became part of the initiative. And what the landowners pledge as part of this whole initiative is that they will conserve the succulents on their properties, and that they will become part of this whole initiative to deal with poaching. We're putting up big signboards now along some of the routes with a helpline which SA Hunters will man. Having members in SA Hunters that are here for conservation, we have landowners, we have hunters, and then we also have firearms and sport shooting. But because we have such a diverse member base, we really have to keep our finger on the pulse of what is happening in an array of legislative processes in South Africa. In particular, as far as conservation is concerned, hunting in South Africa is regulated through the conservation legislation. And conservation in South Africa is a concurrent competence, which means that there's national legislation, but each of the 9 provinces also have their own legislation in terms of conservation, which make it quite tricky for an organisation like SA Hunters to keep track of changes in legislation, what is happening, and we have to give inputs in all of these legislative processes. Then in addition, there's the Department of Agriculture that also have an impact on the activities of members of SA Hunters through things like meat regulations and so on. So that is one of the core areas that we in SA Hunters focus on, is to make sure that the interests of our members are represented in all of these legislative processes.